just about ready to drop the puck for the Young Stars tournaments around the league. Let's get ready for that with one of our experts and go-to guys for all things hockey prospects, Stephen Ellis from Daily Faceoff. Before we even get to the weekend and who we'll be seeing with the Winnipeg Jets, we've talked a lot in the last couple of years about Rutger McGroarty. He was finally dealt a fascinating trade, the 14th overall pick in one year's draft for the 14th overall pick in the next year's draft. Brayden Yager's now a Winnipeg Jet. Rutger moves on to the Pittsburgh Penguins. You've covered these guys for a long time. What did you make of the job Kevin Cheveldayoff did, considering the situation that he's in? And thoughts on Brayden Yager, who is number one on your list of top 10 prospects for the Jets at Daily Faceoff?
So the Winnipeg Jets definitely lost the trade if we're looking at just what the players right now. But obviously, if Rutger McGroarty was not going to play, he wasn't going to play. That's how that is. I think the one thing is, the more talented player was shipped off, but they're getting a centerman here in Brayden Yager, who I really do like. And, he was easily Pittsburgh's best prospect, and it wasn't even close. And watching him play last year in person, being that he's out west, I don't get to see him a lot in person, but I did see him in a couple training camps before he got drafted, got to see him at other international tournaments. But then I've seen him now, the World Junior Summer Showcase, and at the Buffalo Prospects tournament last year. And the one thing that really stood out to me was that when he's on his game, the puck is glued to him. He could do so many great things with that. I think he's got the makings there of still being a top six forward. I think, the fact that he could score in so many different ways is good. Not going to go out there and beat some guys up to physically and things like that. But I do think with the puck as a two-way center, I do really like what the Jets are getting there. And I think that I as much as I like Brad Lambert, I have Brayden Yager ahead of him. And it's funny because I just released my top 75 prospect rankings, and I think I have them back to back now 2 years in a row. So they're pretty close.
Well, and we'll get to Lambert in a minute. Yager, of course, as far as the readiness right now, at 19 years old, probably looks to go back to junior. And, somewhat unfortunate that, there might not be an AHL path for him. That's a conversation we have often of guys that have played so long in the Western Hockey League. But, the season he had last year, from being drafted, getting a chance to, be in an NHL training camp with Sidney Crosby, going back in, being a big part of that World Junior team, and then taking that club all the way to a Western Hockey League championship. He had plenty of time to both grow as a player and some great situational opportunities to help that development as well.
Yeah, I definitely, this year for me, I want to see him get more engaged along the boards and not being kind of just a, watching eye from afar. Obviously, you look at the numbers he put up last year, he clearly did good. He had 95 points, and he was actually one of the only players that seemed to show up every single game for Canada at the World Juniors. And this year, we know he'll probably be a top six player on that team and one of the most important players they have. So there's a lot going for him there. I think for me, it's, yes, I wish I could see him in the AHL right away, because what does he had 95 points last year. What's he going to do this year? 75 assists, 110 points. Does that benefit anybody? Not really. When you start getting into the 100 points and you're not an overage guy, I feel like there's very little you can actually learn. But for me, this is a perfect year of him saying, okay, I can score. I can set players up. Look at my assist totals the last couple of years. Now I'm going to go out there and contribute in other ways, be super engaged physically, going out there and being as valuable of a two-way player as possible. Make yourself indispensable. That's what he's got to do this year. And I think this is a good opportunity for him to do that.
We can't wait. We had a great conversation with him. He seemed really excited, and his parents are excited to have him in the Jets pipeline, not too far away from home. And he will certainly be a focus of attention for Winnipeg Jet fans when the club heads out to Penticton for this tournament on the weekend. You mentioned how close you had Brayden Yager and Brad Lambert. If Yager projects to be a year down the road for making that move to pro hockey, Brad Lambert certainly seems to be a lot closer. He had a great season last year playing at center. What do you make of Brad Lambert's readiness to show that he belongs in the National Hockey League and stick around?
I want him to make the best push possible out of training camp here. I think, whether it's at center or whether it's at the wing. It'll be interesting to kind of see what they kind of see as his development path. With Lambert, the one reason why I do give the advantage to Yager is I think Yager is just a better two-way player. But from the skill perspective, Brad Lambert has been, near the top of his draft class now for a couple of years. Let's not forget that he was projected to go top 3 heading into that 2022 draft, and wasn't a great year. And then obviously 2 years ago now wasn't another great year. But this past season kind of showed this guy means business. And that is the Brad Lambert that we know is very capable of playing a top 6 role in the NHL. And that's the thing. I think he is a top 6 player. Probably not this year, but maybe in 2 years. Maybe that's when he becomes a top 6 NHL player. I think he contributes in a lot of ways with the puck. And I'm really excited to see what he could do, because you watch him in warmups, you watch him in a game, so much raw skill, and I got to watch him up close at a Toronto Marlies game. I go to Marlies games a lot at ice level, watch, and his speed and the way he was able to come up with the plays when he was playing against the Marlies really kind of showed this guy's got a lot going for him. So I'm high on him.
Well, with Monahan being gone, Toffoli not being re-signed, there certainly is a path to him, cracking the roster and potentially even getting an opportunity to play in the top 6 early on, which I think a lot of us would love to see how he'd do. He established himself as a pro with a great season in Manitoba last year, and he seems to probably be the guy closest to knocking on the door for a spot with the big club this year. Colby Barlow is next on your team. And if Colby, you can speak to his season last year. He wasn't on the World Junior. He still puts up, he had 40 goals in 50 games. The guy can absolutely finish. But there seems to be a bit of noise around Barlow right now. He didn't report to his OHL team before training camp, and we heard sort of public statements from the general manager. Really, it sounded to me kind of like bridge building, Stephen. Do you think Colby Barlow, if he doesn't crack the Jets, goes back to Owen Sound? Will there be some sort of a trade, or where's Colby at situationally, both with the Jets and his OHL team right now?
So I'll say this, that I watched him at the World Junior Summer Showcase a few weeks ago, and that was one of the most entertaining guys to watch out there, because not only can he shoot the puck, and we know he could do that, still waiting for that 50 goals though. He was out there trying to make as many people mad as humanly possible. I think he had 2 occasions where he was yelling at guys from his own penalty box. I loved it. I loved how aggressive he got. In terms of what's going next, I think, Owen Sound's not looking to be a team that's going to be making a huge push for it this year, I don't believe. And it'll be interesting to see if they do trade him. A team like Mississauga, a team like Peterborough, a couple of these teams that are looking to go all the way this year could be really interesting. But I think with him, I want to see someone who uses his line mates a bit more. You see those stat lines, and you got to go back to the last year before COVID to find the last time that he played any level of hockey and had more assists than goals. This guy just scores so often, and I feel like part of the reason maybe that we haven't seen him rated higher as a prospect is he does try to do a lot of things himself. He's got a great shot. He can clearly score. He's got 86 goals over the last 2 years, which is unbelievable. Even though he didn't put up a ton of points at the U18s a couple years ago, I thought that what he did there was drive the play and get the pucks on net, which is all you can ask for from him. I want to see him get a bit more engaged defensively. I want to see him do I think he's getting better at that, and I do think his defensive game is better, but he's not a super well-rounded player at this point. He's not the quickest player out there, and at this point, that does hurt his overall ability. So we'll see kind of what happens there. But it'll be interesting because, there's a couple of notable players across the OHL this year that haven't reported the camps. And some of them said they just want to focus on the NHL training camps and development camps. But we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I heard some rumblings at the draft that maybe he was looking for, to be on a more competitive team, because it's great to be a really young captain. And by all accounts, he's done a great job for a couple of years doing that. But, man, those seasons get really long. And, you look around at so many of your contemporaries getting a chance to show what they can do in the playoffs and, being not being in it or being out quickly. And, it is tough on that development path. One guy that would love to be playing in playoffs for the last few years has been Chaz Lucius. And it's impossible to talk about Chaz without talking about, literally the walking embodiment of Murphy's Law when it comes to injuries. If he can stay healthy, What kind of a player might he be able to turn out to be?
I don't know anymore. That's the thing. I was so high on him so many years ago, but like you look at the game count, and it looks like he's still playing college hockey of how few games he's playing in a year.
Yeah.
And it's disappointing to see that because there was so much talk about him like 2-3 years before he got drafted as this player who could do a whole lot. Like he was playing with the U18 team as an underage player. I remember that tournament he had at the under 17s where he just like goalies had no chance of stopping him. He was just scoring at will out there. And I think that he's got a ton of talent, but just staying healthy has been a problem. It's been a bunch of different issues. And when you get hurt that often, like he doesn't look anywhere as aggressive as a player as he did when he was started on in college. When he played that first year in Minnesota, he was willing to hit anybody out there and get aggressive. And we just haven't seen that the last couple of years because it looks like he's going out there trying to just not get hurt. So he's got to be able to confidently go back into the battles and win those fights because, the Jets do have a bunch of guys who are capable of putting pucks in the net. So if he's not going to be the guy doing that, he projects more like a playmaker anyways. But if he's not going to go out and put out a ton of points, he's got to find other ways to be more effective. And a guy who doesn't really want to engage physically is not going to play a lot of bottom six. So I think there's still middle six potential there. I still believe he's got a shot at being in the NHL, but we got to see that he could play at least 50 games in a season before we could feel confident about that right now.
Stephen Ellis from Daily Faceoff getting us ready for the Prospects Tournament Rookie Camp, discussing the top members of the Jets prospect pool. And I'll be honest, the one guy that, I've probably seen more than the others, certainly we've seen him a couple times at camp, that has really stood out. And the guy that I'm most excited to see come training camp is Elias Salomonsson, who had a monster season last year, playing with men, winning a championship. Like, I don't know that he's ever projecting to be a guy that's going to be putting up Cale Makar numbers, but really did turn into a solid, steady defenseman, which is something the Jets have needed. Oh, and he's got a right shot as well. How ready do you think he is for the move to North America? And, if you had to bet on the Jets, the Manitoba Moose, how much he'll play in the NHL, where are you at on his readiness to do that, at least, Stephen?
He's fully ready for the AHL, no question about it. I think what we saw from him last year, such a good skater, wasn't afraid of anybody out there. He was fearless. He'd play heavy minutes on obviously a very good Swedish team there. And then I thought he also looked good at the World Juniors. Didn't put up a ton of points, but that wasn't his role. I think that what we saw there is a guy who probably is going to be a third pairing defenseman, but he's going to be good at it. Will he become more of a shutdown guy in the NHL? We'll see, because, growing up, a couple of years, you saw somebody who really had offense on his mind, but just things weren't clicking. I feel like he's had to change his game a little bit, but he's done so well at it. A very good passer, like a really good passer, moves the puck as well as anybody at this age, quick hands to get himself out of trouble. And again, he's a good skater. So I do think this is a guy that probably should spend 2 years in the AHL, just kind of getting up to speed. And, the thing about it is he's 19 years old. There's no rush for him right now. I think he just turned 20 recently, but he's 20 years old. He's coming to play in a new area for the first time in his life. Like, this is a chance for him to just take your time. Let's see what happens. By the time you're 22, you're probably ready to go in the NHL. But right now, no reason to rush him. Let him play a full year in Manitoba, see what happens. But I do like him a lot, because what we saw this past year is you could tell, he didn't look like he was a teenager out there. He looked like a full-grown man that's been playing pro hockey for 5-6 years.
Yeah, I'm sort of with you that, in all likelihood, he starts with the Manitoba Moose. I don't rule out, though, even this year, him getting an opportunity maybe at times to play some games with the Jets. I think back to last year in training camp, and it did seem like maybe it was a little bit of foreshadowing down the road. That when he was in the lineup, they had him paired with Josh Morrissey, which certainly is, high praise for a youngster that's coming in to get his first chance at camp. But much like Morrissey, who was actually pegged to spend another year in the American Hockey League, if an injury arises and you get that opportunity, you can maybe speed along that process. And I think he might be more ready than a lot of other players if he did get that opportunity to show that maybe he can help the team, the big club right now, and stick around. He'll certainly be a hot topic when we get through. What about Chibrikov? Chibrikov, we saw last year with the Moose, who, really, he was an entertaining player, a ton of energy, did score, got a goal in his first NHL game. I think he's probably another one of those guys that's maybe a little bit more ready for the battle when it comes to the National Hockey League. But, if he turns into an NHLer, what sort of a player and what sort of a role do you think Chibrikov has in Winnipeg?
It'll be interesting because I've kind of changed my opinion on him a few times the last couple of years. I really liked him as a junior player. I've liked what I saw back in Russia, and then you see him this past year and you see those numbers. Clearly he knows how to put the puck in the net, but not a great skater. I think that's something he's going to have to get better at. Not great defensively. Again, watching him play a couple times this past year, it felt like he lost a lot of battles that he should have easily won just because it looks like he was just not physically ready for it and get caught off guard. But you put him in front of the net or you put him in a scoring chance, like a power play or something like that, and he puts pucks in the net. So you can't deny how good of a point producer he is. I think that he should be given a chance to play games this year. I think, at bare minimum, give him 10, 15, see what he could do there, because I think every time he's gone to a new level, whether it be Russian Junior League to Russian Pro to where he is now, he finds new ways to get creative and new ways to be effective. And so even though I do think there are some flaws in his game, he's got to find a way to use the smaller ice and be quicker out there, because he did lose a bunch of puck battles last year that just felt like he shouldn't. But if he could get better at that, which is something that can be fixed at the NHL level, I think he could be a decent middle six player.
Stephen, what did you think of Alphonse Frey, who the Jets picked in the first round in Vegas?
It's funny. I've again, hit or miss for me, but the real hits were at the U18s, where I thought he was one of Sweden's best players and played all situations for them, played a lot of minutes. And when Gabriel Eliasson, an Ottawa Senators prospect, was benched, I think it was 2 different times in the tournament, we saw Alphonse Frey go out there and take a spot and look really good. So I think, not a huge guy out there, but I do see him as someone who could play on the power play in a couple of years, could put up 25, 30 points. Probably not going to be a top pairing defenseman, but good enough and skilled enough where if you need him to pinch up higher in the lineup, he can, because he's been doing that for so long at a young age, and he's really smart. So I really did like that pick at number 37.
I got to ask you about Jacob Julien, who's number 9. And, usually guys that are 5th rounders, more often than not, don't make the NHL. He had a hell of a season last year in London. And, once we started kind of paying attention to what was happening in the OHL playoffs, he seemed to be everywhere. I mean, how far did this young man come last year, and what do you make of him as an NHL prospect?
When he was drafted, I had never heard of him, or at least have watched London Knights games and didn't notice him whatsoever. But the one thing that really became clear was there was a one point where he just didn't really want to pursue hockey. It didn't look like that was going to be a career path for him. But then he got with the right coaches and the right people, and it's like, no, look, if you use your pure strength and all that to your advantage, you're going to make this work out. And the Jets took a chance on him in the 5th round. And when you're drafting in the 5th round, you're looking for someone who could be a hidden gem. And honestly, again, that draft was 1 year ago, but that already looks like one of the best value picks in the draft, because of just the fact that this year he went out there, he was so much more confident shooting. I went back and watched some video clips of him in his draft year, and it looked like he was afraid to, when he got the puck, he didn't know what to do. He was not willing to make passes, or if he did, he was more just dumping the puck in. He wanted to take control. And once he started to see those results, you saw somebody who was just playing with so much confidence. And when a player, this is a very minor thing, but if you look at a prospect and they're smiling a lot, that's a sign of someone who is very, very confident in themselves. And you need confidence when you're a teenager to go out there and be as effective as possible with all the pressure that's being put on you, knowing this is make it or break it for your career. And I feel like he handles that really well. And we saw that in the OHL playoffs, a guy that didn't seem to matter if he was going up against a more skilled player or anything like that. He was ready for the challenge. He could score, he can hit, he can be strong defensively. He's an all-around threat. So I really like where he is in his development. And I think that the Jets, found, even if he doesn't end up becoming a full-time NHLer, they found a value pick at least.
One more guy that I wanted to ask you about, but he's not a guy that we're going to see this weekend because he's still in the KHL, is Dmitry Rashevsky. And this guy, to be honest, amongst Jet fans, is probably the biggest mystery of players in the prospect pool, just because he's in Russia, has not been over here. How good of a prospect is Rashevsky? And, will he ever even come to North America, do you think? Or is he a guy that, sort of is a little bit older right now at 23 and has a pretty good thing going back in the homeland with in the KHL.
So that's the thing. Like by the time that he would be eligible to sign a contract, he'd be midway through being 24 years old. That'd be next spring because he's an October baby. But already not looking to a great start to this year. Granted, not exactly playing with the greatest lineup around him, but I've watched him now 3 times and haven't really noticed him a whole lot out there with Dynamo. The one thing about him last year was he went out there and was one of the better goal scorers on a team that didn't have a ton of goal scorers to work with. So he had to go out there and do a lot, and I thought he did pretty good. So, the thing with him, he's not a good skater. He's not a great two-way player. And if you're not going to be a top 6 player, and he won't, you need to be able to at least do those 2 things well, and he doesn't. So I am a little concerned there. It would be interesting because I do have him as my number 10 prospect for the Jets prospect pool. He's a guy that I think, if he signed, it would be with the intention of trying to have him make the NHL team next year. But there's going to be a bunch of other guys coming through that can do a bit more that will be challenging him there. So if I would be completely honest, unless he blows the doors off this year and is untouchable, I don't know if he's a guy that you really need to think about long term here and just say, you know what, okay, fine. It just maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe you see if another team wants his rights, because there is definitely some skill there. He knows how to shoot the puck, and goals are hard to find for most of the KHL. Like that's the thing. Every time you hear a guy that signs as a free agent, it's usually somebody who just had this explosive year, but scored 22 goals or something like that. Like not like anything crazy, but scoring goals are so much harder in the KHL, where you see goalies putting up 940, 950 save percentages. So him going out there and putting up 24 last year, hopefully he gets more than that this year. He clearly knows how to score. I just don't think he's well-rounded enough to be an NHL threat.